Hi, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to Evoke Therapy Program's broadcast. Today is Monday, February 8th, 2021. For those of you who might be new to the broadcast, every other broadcast, we try to have an open question and answer. And it's available to evoke participants, to evoke family and friends, to anybody who has the link, actually. And it's an opportunity to ask any questions about therapy, psychology, relationships, parenting, anything related to the program or how we do what we do, both our wilderness therapy program and also our intensive therapy program for adults and families. So you're welcome to submit questions and comments at any point during the broadcast. Malia, who is moderating for me this evening, will pass those along to me when there's an empty space. I think we only have one or two pre-submitted questions, so I'm going to get to those first, and then I'll take whatever comes up live for you all. Take your time to send those at any point. So I'll get right into it. Somebody asked this question. My son, now almost 19, was at Evoke almost 4 years ago. He lives at home now and is doing pretty well. I am writing about his girlfriend. She is 21. Without adult supervision since age 14, she's had a difficult relationship with her family. She is very guarded around our family. She comes to our house frequently, but does not interact much with anyone other than my son. I very much want her to feel comfortable in our home and get to know her better, but she has walls around her that are difficult to cross. I know from your teachings that giving her space, meeting her where she's at, and not making it my agenda to have her behave in a certain way is likely to be more productive than trying to change her. I still find myself wishing I could break through her walls, and sometimes I feel I overstep. My son tells me not to push it. Do you have any advice? I am new to interacting with the significant others of my children. I like this question because it's complex and you obviously have a basic knowledge of foundational understanding of what we talk about in attachment-based therapy. So for all of you, let's start with the first premise of attachment-based therapy, which is that she has a good reason to have her walls up. Something in her past, something in her previous contexts has told her that it's not safe to open up to be easily accessible or to connect to people really easily. And so even though the phrase, kind of break through the walls, it's just a good reminder, this story, this question, to remember that we're breaking through something that somebody put in place for a very good reason. So I might suggest, there's lots of different ways to approach this. You can gently acknowledge it. You wouldn't want to call them walls or defenses, but you could talk about that you want to respect her distance and you'd also like to connect to her. That could be a way to do it. Another very effective way can be indirectly, finding ways. I had somebody recently who asked a loved one for a favor, and asking somebody for help or a favor or advice on something is a wonderfully indirect olive branch. See, if you confront the defense or the wall head on, you are most likely to provoke its reinforcement. You're most likely to create the sense from the person who has the wall up that you're trying to penetrate it, that you're trying to get through it. And they have already established by their behavior that it's not safe. And so instead of going at the defense right away, start off with the understanding that people have their defenses for a good reason. I was talking to a client recently about this impulse that people have to try to break through people's walls and defenses. I think it's almost universal for us. We were talking about how at times, people, you share with somebody something and they immediately try to solve it or fix it and it's not broken. Being sad or angry or upset or disappointed or frustrated isn't broken. And so people learn when they're confronted with these invasive individuals, they learn that the world is not a safe place, that they're going to bump up against other people's limitations and eventually get hurt by it. So all of your instincts are right on, to respect it, to understand, to move slowly, to move as slowly as you can. But there are ways that you can be indirect. You can try naming it if you feel like there's an opportunity for that. You can even talk about what you're learning. You can relate to the defense. Those are ways of kind of naming it and dealing directly with the events without kind of confronting it head on. But I like the idea of trying some indirect ways, asking for help on a project, asking to do something, asking for help me put up this shelf, asking for advice or information in an area that she might not know something about. But like I teach to the therapists at Evoke all the time, the first mistake is not the big one. And here's what I mean by that. The first mistake is when you step on somebody's toes. And in therapy, or in the example of this question, that would be if either of the approaches that I described as possibilities seem to create a defensive response in your child's significant other, then you've gone too far. The second mistake that people make is they try again and again and again. They try to explain themselves. They try to get the person not to be defensive or to understand their intent. It's that second mistake that is the big mistake, because everybody is going to step on somebody's toes at times. That's inescapable. For therapists, for parents, for spouses, for friends, you're going to step on people's toes. The big mistake is when you can't let it go. You can't drop it. There's a principle in parenting that I was taught many years ago, which is we have to allow our children their dignity. And for me, that idea had its application with the fact that I was always trying to push or get around my children's defenses, and I called it loving. I was going to use my X-ray vision or my diamond encrusted drill bit to get through. My anecdotes, my stories, my humor, whatever it is, my clinical savvy and skill set to try to get past somebody's defenses. And somebody taught me you have to give children their dignity. And so I learned that it's not appropriate to use your X-ray vision, even if you have it, even if you can see clearly with those goggles on. It's not appropriate. It's threatening. It's invasive. It's a violation. Now, for parents that have information about children or each other or loved ones, I say this all the time. Let that information inform you. If you have X-ray vision, wherever you got it from, your ability to kind of see into somebody, see what's behind the defense, see what might be motivating them, that kind of thing. If you have that, let that inform you, but don't let it come out of your mouth. And let it inform you about how to respond to that person respectfully. As a parent, it's going to inform your boundaries, your consequences. It's going to inform the privileges you offer. It's going to inform you. The temptation for virtually everybody is to let that stuff come out of your mouth, because, again, we're really fighting against this urge, this need to get it right, to not have the child, in this case, upset with me. So if I can give them the information that I have, they'll clearly see that I understand what's going on, and then they can't possibly be upset with me. And of course, none of that is true. So those are my thoughts. I think you already have the right instincts, the right impulses, in terms of you're respecting the boundary, finding a gentle way to name it, to get into a discussion, even with some of the information you have with your psychoeducation around parenting that you've learned from this process, but also trying an indirect way. I call it the grocery store lecture. I think having somebody go with you in a car to run an errand is a fantastic example, because you're not looking at each other. You're looking straight ahead. And there's something about that that's less threatening. So it goes back to, walls and defenses are there for a reason. And when we respect them and honor them, and avoid violating them, we become more effective at helping people, encouraging people, inviting people to let their walls down lower and lower. So thank you for that. Somebody said, I just listened to your webinar about the ADD specialist you all brought on board. How often is he in the field? Can you talk about his work with your group? He's not in the field often. He's semi-retired. He's been in the field many, many, many times over the years. I imagine hundreds of times over the years. But now it's intermittent. Most of his training is with us in our in-services. It's in our weekly staff in-service and in our clinical meetings. So he's trying to teach the teachers. He's auditing our assignments constantly, looking at how we can find a way to honor multiple intelligences, to be able to respond to people's learning difficulties, learning differences with compassion, understanding, and not kind of with a sledgehammer. So most of his training is around our curriculum, our therapists, and our staff. He does make visits to the field on occasion, infrequently. He's made hundreds in the past in his career, but now he's our executive coach and our guide. So that kind of gives you some idea about what he spends his time doing. Somebody says, you speak of teaching narcissistic teens how to heal by teaching them how to feel. Can you please expand on how we can do this with our 19-year-old son to help him begin to feel? Well, there's two counterintuitive ways to respond to narcissists or narcissistically wounded individuals, which needn't rise to the level of the diagnoses. And everybody has some narcissistic wounding. Narcissistic wounding is the wound of not being seen and heard as a child. Okay? So everybody has some of that. There's nobody that got away scot-free with that. So, and children are naturally narcissistic, self-centered, right? As the brain develops, that naturally sloughs off some. So that's just some context. But the two counterintuitive ways to respond to narcissists are these. And I'll get to the second one in just a moment, the one that you brought up. But first and foremost, it's for you to have a self. And I know that might seem abstract and strange, but for you to have a self, to be who you are, to have limits, and to own your limits is critical. I'm holding up my hand like a circle if you're watching on the video. If you have limits, if this circle with my fingers represents you, the edges of your capacity, the edges of your patience, of your love, because we all have a human limited capacity in all areas, all virtues, right? If you can recognize and own that, your child has to deal with an other. That's really important. Children have to bump up against limits to understand that somebody else is present. Many people, in an attempt to try to fix their own wounding from childhood that's unresolved, try to be everything. They think it's their job, something to aspire to have endless limits, to be as flexible as possible. Some people misinterpret my teaching around capacity and listening and holding in this same way. It's not realistic to be all capable, and it's definitely not something to aspire to. So you have your limits. The important fork in the road is when the child finds your limits, to not make it about the child. Without healing, without skills, without awareness, we make the child feel like they're too much. And that is the problem. Instead of saying, you've reached my capacity, my patience and energy is exhausted, I need a timeout, I can't do it. The answer is no. I'm overwhelmed. I'm frustrated. I need a timeout. I snapped. I was reactive. I'm sorry. So if you can come to terms with your own humanness, if you have the audacity to be you and own your limits, then your child has to deal with another person. And they have to deal with frustration tolerance. They have to deal with delay of gratification, self-soothing. They have to become flexible. They have to realize that the world is full of others. So having a self is the central ingredient in helping your child move through the narcissistic phase and become a person. They have to deal with a human being. And if we shame them and tell them, I was told when I was a child that I was too much, that I was too dramatic. And so I grew up thinking something was wrong with me. It took me years to realize my mother was the one that was compromised. I was just Brad. I was just being Brad. And all the messy corners and crevices and shapes of me, I was being me, and my mother was overwhelmed. But instead of owning that because she had too much shame, because she hadn't dealt with the wounding from her childhood, she made me the problem. She made me the bad object. Instead of owning her own limitations, her own humanness, in the book I call it your own horrible, rotten self, which just means your selfness. Instead of owning that, she made Brad too much or not enough or wrong. And then I grew up thinking something was wrong with me and spent decades trying to prove to the world that I was lovable and okay, and created all kinds of messes in my efforts to prove that to the world. So that's the first ingredient. The second ingredient is they get to be angry, sad, frustrated, hurt. They get to be held. They get to be seen. They get to be understood. And when a human being feels authentically and deeply, they recognize feelings in others. If you get treated like a person, you end up becoming a person, and you see people. If you get treated like an object or a thing, you see other people as objects and things. And in that model, in that paradigm, when everybody is just a thing without feelings, you can do some pretty harmful things to people without any sense of remorse, because you're not hurting a human being. You're not even in touch with your feelings, their feelings. You're not in touch with their humanity. I was talking about this in a staff training last year when a lot of the social justice issues were coming up. And I was describing our work as therapists and what we do. And I was saying part of what we've seen in these filmed horrible incidences is that at times people treat people like they're things. They're not in touch with the humanity of the other person. And what we know about that person who treats other people like things, where they're not in touch with their humanity, is they themselves have become a sliver of a human being. They become a non-feeling thing. So the antidote to sociopathic behavior, and it can be a steep hill the more severe and cemented it is. Narcissistic wounding, narcissism is lower on the continuum of severity, of course, much lower. But the antidote to cruelty, to abuse, when you're treating the abuser, is learning how to feel everything, all the time. And that's built, like I said, on the foundation of selfhood. You or me, the therapist, have to be a person with limits that I own. I hope that helps. Thanks for the opportunity to kind of expand on that. Somebody writes, my son just left Evoke a week ago and is now at a therapeutic boarding school. Can you please give me your best advice for us in this new chapter? Malia, could you pull up Preparing for Transitions? I think we have a couple of webinars on transitions. I think the thing that I say most, at the forefront when I talk about transitioning is therapeutic programs or after Evoke are more like daily life. It's not going to be as dynamic. It's not going to be as wonderful. It's not going to be as safe, right? Because the Evoke is very contained and the child is buffered from outside temptations. My favorite analogy, you may have heard this, was it's like learning to juggle three balls, which I can juggle three balls pretty well, but I can't juggle four for very long, and I can't juggle five at all. So when you hand me three balls, if I'm juggling three balls and then you hand me three more, I'll drop them all. Not because I've forgotten how to juggle, but because that's what happens when we're overwhelmed, right? Everything kind of falls apart. So reset your expectations and lean into the messiness. Lean into the ineffectiveness. There's the safety net is still there, but they're given more opportunities, more temptations, more access to you. In wilderness therapy at Evoke, you're fairly insulated from each other. It starts off with just letter writing. Eventually, it can be phone calls. And then there's, of course, the end of program visit. During non-pandemic times, there's a mid-program visit. But that distance gives you a buffer, a kind of natural buffer zone, which makes it easier. In some ways, wilderness therapy is the easiest place you and your child will ever be. And so the messiness, the complexity, the everydayness of therapeutic boarding school means it's going to be harder. And it's not going to be as much of a high. That wilderness shine is going to kind of wear off. And you're going to be dealing with Tuesdays and Thursdays. I've said this before. I've run a couple of Ironman triathlons and 7 marathons in my life. And race day is the best day in the world. Race day is an incredible high. One of the most wonderful feelings I've ever experienced. The hard part of an Ironman or a marathon is Tuesday morning at 6 a.m. at the high school track when it's 28 degrees outside and sleeting or snowing or raining. That's the hard time. And therapeutic boarding school is more like Tuesday morning at 6 a.m., 28 degrees. It's not the reunion. It's not the end of wilderness program, reuniting experience. It's not the phone call that you get once in a while. It is more like everyday life, which gives us an opportunity to help and treat you and your family and your child in real time. So if you change your expectation about kind of that high to just more like every day, that's what these programs are supposed to be like. They're supposed to have a safety net or a backstop, but with some wiggle room, with some opportunities for it to get messy, for mistakes to happen, and kind of figure out how to navigate that landscape. Wilderness therapy is pristine comparatively because of how contained and how everybody has kind of a buffer zone. So that's the thing I would say most. And then the juggling analogy. Welcome and lean into mistakes, to regression, to your regression, to his regression, her regression. Lean into those things and give yourself over to the lessons that those setbacks and those detours, those distractions, those regressions have to offer you. That's what I would say. And then, as you see here, that Malia is posting a couple of different episodes that I've done on regression and transitioning. Episode 193 and episode 120. Somebody writes this comment, just a comment. Thank you to the extraordinary staff at Evoke Cascades that have had such a profound effect on my son's life. Well, you're absolutely welcome. We have the honor, I think most of us, to do a job that we would do for free. Someone writes, our son will be leaving Evoke soon for a therapeutic boarding school. This has been a difficult decision for us and our son is deeply disappointed that he can't come home to show us how much he's learned from Evoke. How can we best support our son and convey to him that the decision is indeed the best decision for his future? Perfect question. Perfect question. I'm going to break it apart. First of all, it makes sense that he's deeply disappointed. That's okay. That's not broken. I remember one time I was visiting a couple of grandparents and their grandchild, and he had learned of the therapeutic program that he was going to after Evoke weeks before and had resigned himself to it. But after seeing his grandparents, feelings came up for him. His grandparents were the primary custodians. And as I drove up to the site, we used to have a graduation site. As I drove up to the site, the grandmother met me on the dirt road. And she said, it's not going well. And I said, tell me about it. She said, well, he's upset. And I said, okay, let's get into the session. So I went over and the young man, 16, 17-year-old young man, was cooking beans and rice in a can like they do. And grandparents were sitting cozy next to the fire. And I said, sounds like there's been some fireworks or issues. Kind of recap for me what's gone on. And grandmother said, we were talking about the school that he was going to next, and he was upset, sad, and scared, anxious. And I said, okay. And I said, what did he do? And she said, well, he told us that. And I said, was he lobbying to come home? Was he berating you? Did he yell? Did he use aggressive language? She said, no, he was just sad. And I looked over at my student, and he had a smile on his face. And I knew he knew. And I explained to the grandmother, I said, it's not broken. Any of us would feel the same feelings if we were dealing with the reality of that news. It's okay. And it sounds like he used a feeling statements, just used it once, and there's nothing broken about that. So your job is to be emotionally present with him in his pain. And to the second part of your question, don't do anything to convince him that it's the best decision for his future. It's his job to figure out. I've told the story about a father visiting the field mid-program and having a similar kind of discussion with his son. And the next day when we were discussing it, it was me, another therapist, and the therapeutic staff. And the father was bringing up, it wasn't a hot or heated discussion that had happened overnight, but he was bringing up that his son was questioning and lobbying, just like your son, for, I don't know that your son's lobbying, but he was making the point that he was disappointed that he couldn't come home to show his father that he made such improvements. And, one of the staff said to the student, they said, I thought we got past this. I thought you'd accepted this. And, what I explained later was the parents being present brings it up again. That brings up a regressive emotional state. So it's okay for it to come undone a little bit. That's what will happen. And at one point, the staff tried to make a case about why it was, just like you said, the best decision for his future and giving examples. And I stopped the staff after a few minutes. I said, can I take a shot at this? And I turned to the dad. I said, I'm going to speak for you. You can tell me if I get anything wrong, but let me give it my best shot. And the dad said, go for it. And so I said to the son, as if I was the father, I said, I'm doing the best I can. And I really wish I could convince you this was the best choice, because that would make it easier for all of us. But I can't. In fact, I lay awake at night wondering if I'm doing the right thing. Yes, I've talked to professionals and to others, but I still have my doubts, and it's my best guess. And what I don't want is I don't want to have these kinds of discussions. Even though the one we had last night wasn't like the old ones we used to have, I don't want to have these. And so this is my boundary. This is what I'm going to do. And it's all I got. And I turned to the father to check and see if I'd misrepresented him, and tears were streaming down the father's face. And I knew the answer to the question, but I said to the father, did I get it right? And he said, perfectly. And I showed him, I said, the strongest position is not being right or convincing somebody of the rightness of something. The strongest position is being a person. Because that's all you are. And frankly, the one thing I will tell you that, again, I don't want to come out of your mouth or any of your mouths toward your children, the best way that he can show you of the work that he's done is to move through this. The way that he'll show you how much he's learned at Evoke, that's the phrase in your question, how much he's learned from Evoke. The way that he'll show you is by dealing with this, not without pain or sadness or grief, and not even perfectly or flawlessly, but well enough. That will be the greatest demonstration of his progress and all the lessons that he learned. You see, if they can handle a yes, they can handle a no. If they can handle the privilege that they're lobbying for, then they can deal with a no. And while it's not all of your children's issues, dealing with boundaries is pretty universal. And so dealing with your boundary, which in this case is a big one, a therapeutic boarding school, it's a big one. I acknowledge that. But don't try to convince them to be happy or to like it or to get over it or to agree with you. That would be at odds with everything that we're trying to teach here. Let him feel it. Sit with him. Don't have answers. Don't have anecdotes. Don't have suggestions. Don't tell him what I said tonight, for sure. Just be present with him. Have empathy. And sit with him in your human, imperfect, not knowing, doing the best you can self. And then turn it over to him. Thank you for that question. Somebody writes, is it normal for kids to hold on to the feelings of anger and betrayal from being transported? I know this will last for a while, but how do we get past the fear that we have inflicted longer term distrust and impact? It's not a perfect answer that I have, but it tends to be true. Just like the last question, let them feel angry and betrayed as long as they want to. You guys are going to hurt your children. You're going to dent them. You're going to bruise them. And you cannot not dent and bruise your children. Sometimes it's going to be because you're impatient, you're reactive. Sometimes it's because you're going to be trying your best and you make a mistake. Sometimes you're going to be doing what most people would think to be the right thing, and your child is going to feel dented and bruised by that. The answer to the question is you let them feel it as long as they want to. This is the secret. This is the key. It's not perfect, but it tends to be true. A parent's attachment to what they want a child to feel and think about anything that the parent does is one of the biggest barriers to the child moving through the feeling. In other words, if I've transported my child once, just once, right? I've sent two of my children to a program, different times, different reasons, different experiences. Neither one of them wanted to go. Both of them felt the severity of the intervention. Both of them felt angry and sad and frustrated for having their life turned upside down and disrupted, for having a summer taken away and holidays taken away. Both of them have their valid feelings. And in the moments that they come to me and say, I'm angry and you screwed me over and you betrayed me and you traumatized me, my response is, I'm sorry. I hear you. It was my best guess, but I can hear how it impacted you. I'm really, really, really sorry that it impacted you that way. And I'm glad you're telling me. That's what we do. And I can tell you, when you let go, there's nothing to fight against. And then they just have to move through it. To grow up, you have to forgive your parents. And not for your parents' sake, but for your own sake. And I don't mean a superficial coat of white paint forgiving. I'm talking about you have to move through and be allowed to feel your anger, your sadness, your grief, your loss, because you were raised by human parents. And sometimes they did things willfully out of anger that hurt you. And sometimes they did things out of anger or fear or sadness or confusion that hurt you. And your job is to grow up. If we as parents do enough work, we get to be a part of that healing process. But for all of you, you can't get it right. You can only get it authentic and real, which is imperfect and beautiful. And then you develop the capacity to let your child feel the anger. My son was asked at a parent support group some years ago if he didn't forgive me. This is my oldest. And he was confused by it, and he answered his question best he could. And after he left, because he was only there for half the meeting, half the parent meeting, I said, it would have been okay. It wouldn't have mattered. I don't mean it wouldn't have mattered in the sense that I wouldn't have cared, but it would have been okay with me if he would have been angry with me, and he was. And I've done many things before and after that he's been angry about. So it's detaching yourself from what you think the child should or needs to, or you want them to feel, that is your best chance at helping them, supporting them, facilitating them, moving through it. Counterintuitive, I think. All right. Couple of announcements, and then I'll take any questions that come in. The Journey of the Heroic Parent and The Audacity to Be You, my 2 books, are available on Amazon, also Audible. The audiobook for The Audacity to Be You is out just recently, and I recorded it myself. Our intensives, if you want to do your own work, and I can't think of a better investment of your time and money than this. Coming to an intensive to do your own work is the best springboard into understanding what it means to do your own work. It's the best gift that you can give to your child. Now that they're stable at Evoke, it's a great gift. Before, during, after Evoke. Independent of Evoke. Nothing to do with the wilderness program. It is something I do myself yearly. Our next in-person availability is March 17th through 21st. You can go to our website. We also are doing them online, so they're a little bit shorter, broken into 2 parts, and cheaper because you don't travel, and safer during the pandemic, although we have wonderful pandemic and COVID precautions in our in-person. The next online online intensive availability is March 24th through 26th. Finding You 2 will happen this May 12th through 16th. There are other programs that do intensive programming. The difference is that Evoke is attachment theory based, and clinically it's created from a clinical model, not a self-help model and not an addiction model, but from a therapeutic model. So that's where we carve out our niche. Email intensives@evoketherapy.com for more information, or give us a call. Go to our website. If you want to do a Pursuits Adventure Trip, which is think of a therapeutic activity out in the woods with your child, with your family. We have a Pursuits program. You can do that in between programs, after programs. We also have a scheduled trip for March 12th through 14th, 18 and above, a multi-sport trip. Talk to Sarah, S-A-R-A, at evoketherapy.com for more information and questions. Online support groups. Our next online support group will be February 11th for wilderness families, current and alumni families. And if you are an alumni of our intensive program, our next support group will be tomorrow night at 6 p.m. Contact Malia at evoketherapy.com or go to our website for more information. We ask all current parents to go to 6 12-step support groups, any combination. We just ask you to try 6. If you haven't started yet, start now. Any combination of Al-Anon, CODA, Families Anonymous, AdultChildren.org, or RefugeRecovery.org is an alternative, a Buddhist-inspired program, less of an emphasis on a higher power. And then NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, NAMI.org is a great place to go for local classes, support in your area at your local chapter. All of these broadcasts are available on your podcast app. Please go there, subscribe, share, give us a rating. Any of your favorite podcast apps, Spotify, your iOS device, that is your Apple device, your Android device, they're available on virtually every podcast platform. On Twitter and Instagram, you can find us using the handle @EvokeTherapy, or for the intensive programs, go to Instagram and find us using the handle @EvokeTherapy Intensives. On Facebook, you can find us by searching either Evoke Therapy Programs or Evoke Therapy Intensives, and the Evoke Therapy blog has new content each week. My next broadcast will be in 2 days, 48 hours. I'll be talking about the first chapter of my book, The Journey of the Heroic Parent. We've gone through the foreword. Now we'll go to chapter 1, Finding Oneself Through Parenting. Somebody writes, go to a Finding You intensive as soon as you can. Don't walk, run. I could not really, you've spent so much time and sacrifice for this. If you're open to a therapeutic process, if you want to know what your work is, if you want to know how your background is affecting your parenting, the research is robust to say that understanding your own family of origin, your own background, is the key that unlocks the door to healthy attachment with your child, which leads to resiliency. And because we're an attachment-based program, we focus on that. So thank you so much for mentioning that. I couldn't say anything more powerfully than that. Somebody says, can you touch a bit on letting go of outcomes? I've realized through doing my work that I have parented with these beautiful visions of our sons going to a college and becoming amazing people in their life. You know, letting go is a long kind of concept. I could talk about it for hours. It leads to fear. It leads to fractures in attachment. It prevents you from seeing your child. When you let go of outcomes, you become more authentic and honest because you're not trying to control people. When you let go of outcomes, your child starts to understand that they are a separate entity than you are. Letting go can be messy because life is messy, but letting go is a spiritual relationship to other people that really speaks to the heart of what it means to love people. So letting go is learning to be authentic and courageous and focus on your side of the street and get your boundaries clear, your limits clear, your position clear, and giving other people choices and then following through with consequences. So it really is a fundamental understanding of what it means to love somebody else. And frankly, we weren't modeled that. Or we were modeled a limited version of that. I almost named the Audacity to Be You book. I almost named it what it means to be a self and love another, because that's what it is. I talk about this with our staff all the time. Travis and I, the clinical director for our intensive program, we talk about this all the time as we're developing and running programming in our intensive program, that people aren't shown what it means to be human and to be connected to each other. And control is so often seen as loving and caring. And not only is it ineffective, but it strikes at it's at odds with raising and encouraging people to be a healthy self. And that's really, if I were summing it down and oversimplifying, the role of a parent is to raise a healthy self. And control is at odds with that task. So we have lots of podcasts and webinars that you can look at on it. The books, both of my books, talk about this very, very clearly. And it's subtle and it's nuanced. And it can't be described by a single set of behaviors. It's a way of being. Somebody writes, I agree, go to an intensive, the best thing for yourself and ultimately for your child. Could not agree more. It's so easy for me to sell them because I go and pay full price for my own every year. And my wife is gone. My adult children have gone. We pay for therapists and my partners to go. We just believe in them. So, all right, folks. Thanks for joining me this evening. I'll see you in a couple of days if you're interested in hearing me go through the new book. Each webinar, each broadcast will be a chapter and then a Q&A, chapter and then a Q&A until we get through all of it. I appreciate and want to honor you showing up. Like I always say, thank you for and in behalf of the people that you love for showing up and doing your work. And even though it might be confusing and you might know what that you might not know what that means, I thank you for showing up and listening and giving it an opportunity to kind of become a part of you. Have a great evening, and I'll talk to you in 2 nights. Take care. Bye-bye.